Hi folks, my name is Jeff Talkington and I'm a systems engineer with Palo Alto Networks. Today we're going to be talking about threat hunting with AutoFocus. We're going to do a quick demo, and what I'd like to do is take this from a slightly different approach. I'm going to give you a scenario and show you how quickly we can find information with AutoFocus. The scenario that we have is that we are security analysts. Our CISO has approached us after reading an article about how ransomware can spread through SaaS applications that use local synchronization. These include things like Google Drive, Office 365, where you can put something into SaaS, synchronize it locally. We've seen that this is a new threat vector for malware in particular. If I can throw a piece of malware out into a SaaS application and have that synchronized locally to everybody within a company, suddenly I can spread malware very easily. The CISO, however, has a meeting with the board in 15 minutes, but wants to have answers to several of these questions prior to that meeting. The questions that our CISO is asking are these. Are we seeing ransomware in our SaaS applications? Now, this is a big question to ask, and we need to do it in less than 15 minutes. 2, are we seeing ransomware throughout our entire organization? That means everything. Is it just us that's seeing ransomware, or are others getting hit as well? This is a valuable question to ask from the security standpoint because we want to understand if we're targeted or we're just part of commodity attacks that everybody else is seeing. 4, are we protected from ransomware? What kind of coverage do we have for ransomware, and how are we protected on our firewalls? 5, how can we add extra protections based on what we find? So based on the threat intelligence that we're getting, how do we add protections to our firewalls? And 6, how effective are ransomware campaigns? Our CISO needs to be able to articulate this to the board and help them understand how big of a threat ransomware is. We're going to do what we can to try to arm our CISO with some valuable information. All right, so before we get started, let's make sure that we level set everybody on what our platform looks like. As most of you know, we've got our next generation firewall in the lower left, and that's the basis for everything we do. On the right is our advanced endpoint protection, that's Traps. We won't jump into that today, but just be aware that it's there. And at the top is our threat intelligence cloud, Wildfire. So Wildfire is all of our threat intelligence. And on top of that, we're going to add in Aperture. Aperture is our security solution for SaaS applications. And I'll show you that in just a minute, and we'll deep dive into that just a little bit. And most importantly, AutoFocus. AutoFocus is our dashboard into Wildfire, our threat intelligence cloud. AutoFocus allows us to get visibility into our threat intelligence, to really look in, do some good searching, and find valuable information. More importantly, it helps us create protections down the road using an open source software called MindMeld, which I'll show you as part of AutoFocus as well. So what we can do is take protections and push them to our firewalls. Okay, so as I said, our CISO has a meeting in about 15 minutes, so we're going to try to get our CISO answers in about 10. It's going to be a little tight, but let's see what we can do, okay? So let's get started. We're going to jump right into Aperture, and as I said, this is our protection for our SaaS applications. If we look at our dashboard, what we can see is that we're looking across all of our SaaS applications. And in this case, we currently have 14, but we're adding more all of the time. And we protect SaaS applications like Box, Dropbox, GitHub, Google Drive, G Suite, all of that. One of the biggest additions that we have, or the ones that are really powerful here, are things like Office 365, and then AWS is a recent addition. We can look at Amazon S3 buckets, which is huge. We can also do EC2 instances and IAM instances as well. So we can look across our entire SaaS application landscape. Now, what we can do is we can look for malware. We can also look for PCI compliance issues, PII data leakage, sensitive credential leakage, documents leaking out, untrusted users that are allowed access into our SaaS applications, and we can even create regular expressions for those things that are specific to our enterprise. We can do searches for those based on regular expressions and make sure those aren't getting out. Since we're talking about ransomware and malware today, let's jump into our Wildfire Analysis piece. And immediately what we can see is we have this cryptolocker.exe was found. CryptoLocker is a variant of ransomware, so we know right off the bat we have seen some ransomware across our SaaS applications. If I click on this, I can get a good idea of what's going on. We've seen that we've quarantined this particular file, right? Which is great. We want to be stopping this. We can see what policy it hit on and exactly where we found this. So we saw this in the Box Cloud app. We can see what its exposure is. In this case, it's publicly exposed, and I'll show you that in just a second. We can see who the owner is and when it was created. On the file exposure, we can see that this is a public URL, which is to say I can just give you a URL and you can come into this file. And it's exposed by a parent folder. So we know that the exposure that we have is based on the parent directory or parent folder that this is a part of. We can also see who's accessing the file. In the case of malware, this becomes important because we know who to notify, that either A, we're sharing malware with them, or B, they're sharing malware with us. Either way, the situation is bad and they need to be notified. And we can see who the collaborators are so they can understand what's going on. All right, but we've quarantined this file and that's good. So let's go back. We know this CryptoLocker exe, that's malware. We know that's ransomware. That's easy. Let's also take a look at this one that might not be as easy. Invoice.doc. As we're looking through, we can see that it's got a malware verdict. We can see where it's shared, it's Box. It's got external exposure and who the owner is. We can see how the file is exposed. Again, this is exposed by a parent folder. Although this one requires a sign-in, which is slightly better, but we can see who's been accessing this file. Again, we know who to notify to let them know that either they're sharing malware with us or we're sharing malware with them. Right, so if we want to look a little bit more at this, what we can do is we can look at our Wildfire report. And this shows us all of the information on why we considered this to be malware. The static analysis initially shows that this contains a macro, which is usually a problem. Standard doc files, we don't normally have a need for a macro, so that's going to be suspicious for us. We can also take a look at our behavioral summary and see why this was considered malware. If we scroll down, we can see here that this doc file opened a Windows PowerShell window. So having an Office doc file that's running a macro and opening a PowerShell is usually a big red flag. So we know that's an issue. Okay. If we wanted to, we can click on here and look at this in virus total and see exactly what's going on. If other people are viewing this as malware as well. But we can also take this hash that we have here and we can search in AutoFocus and see exactly what this is. Now, I know we've got 10 minutes, but I want you to understand very quickly that in just a matter of moments, we were able to look at all of our SaaS applications and determine our malware exposure across all of them within just a few seconds. Doing this manually, you would never be able to do this. So this is a very valuable tool. All right, so we're going to take our SHA-256 hash and we're going to go and take a look in AutoFocus and drill down into that invoice.doc and see exactly what this piece of ransomware is or this piece of malware is and make sure that it is ransomware. So what I can do is I can look for that individual tag, the SHA-256 hash. We can add that in and I can do a search for it. So anything that we see a Wildfire report for means that it has hit Wildfire and we'll be able to see it in AutoFocus and be able to search on it. When we look at AutoFocus, we see that in our samples, we've got this one sample and this is the one that we saw within Aperture. What we can see is that each of our samples will have these tags. In the case of malware, we'll have a malware family tag that's added to this. And this lets us know what version of malware or what type of malware we have for this particular sample. In this case, we have RancerKD, which is a type of ransomware. So we know we are seeing ransomware on our SaaS applications. Along with the malicious or the malware family tag, we also have behavior tags. So in this case, what this is telling us is what this piece of malware is doing. Along with what its family is, we need to understand its behavior. In this case, it deletes volume snapshots, does process injection, and does a windward launch PowerShell, which we saw. It had a macro and launched PowerShell, so we know that. So what we want to understand is, what's our coverage for this? If we take a look at our coverage tab, we'll see that we have Wildfire AV signatures for this. We have domain signatures, and we have URL signatures for all of this, okay? So for every piece of malware that we see, we can quickly take a look and see what our coverage is. So that answers that question. But our CISO wanted to understand ransomware as a whole. So based on these tags that we're seeing, we can do a much broader search and just take a look at ransomware in total. When we look at these tags, there's these individual tags, but there's also group tags. One of them is for ransomware. And what we do is we group tags that we know are specific malware types or families, and we make them into one piece so that we can search across them. For the ransomware tag, you can see that we've got 135 tags that all roll up into this group, and we can actually search based off of that. So let's do that. So we're going to search based off this group, this ransomware group, and go and run a search. And what we'll see is we're going to be able to look at both our samples and all samples. So remember, our CISO is asking us if this issue was just us or what we were seeing worldwide, okay? So for just us, we're seeing more than 30,000 samples, more than 32,000 at this point. So we know, yeah, we've been seeing a lot. This is, we're seeing a lot come across. And this is from the beginning when we started submitting anything into Wildfire. We can also look at all samples, and this lets us know around the globe, or all Palo Alto Networks customers, what we're seeing. And in this case, we've got billions, more than 2 billion samples, and it was going up over 3 billion. But let's go back to our samples. Okay, so we're looking at all of our ransomware samples. We know that we have coverage when we dive into each one of those. What happens if we want to pull in further threat intelligence and utilize that for our firewalls? Well, this is where our other applications come in on AutoFocus. This one in particular called MindMeld. MindMeld was built in-house by one of our developers. And what it does is it ingests threat intelligence feeds, it aggregates them, and allows us to export those and use those on our firewalls. So for example, we had somebody create a prototype or create an input called a miner for WannaCryptor. And we can take a look at that, and this will illustrate the point for you. So what we do is we have what are known as miners, and those take in information either from AutoFocus indicators, from Wildfire indicators, or from any of our third-party intelligence feeds. And these can be some of our partners like Proofpoint. We can also take in threat intelligence feeds from open source intelligence, Spamhaus, all of those things. And in fact, if we look at GitHub, you can pull down any one of these prototypes. So we've got currently more than 150 different prototypes or 150 different miners that we can use. Things like Malware Domain List, Office 365, Proofpoint, OpenFish, all of those, okay? What we do is we pull those miners in, we run them through what are known as aggregators. This is just simply a processor. So what we do is we take these threat intelligence inputs and we aggregate them. So we'll deduplicate any information and make this into a usable format that from all of these threat intelligence feeds, we'll combine those into one usable format and then output those for our use. And we can either use those on our firewalls, we can send them over to another security product, or we can even send those to our SIEM, to create indicators of compromise, so we can use that to do further threat hunting if we want. In this case, what we're going to do is use this to create an external dynamic list on our firewalls that we can use for protections. So as we're seeing threats come in, we can automatically send those protections to our firewall. And let me show you what that looks like. If I click on, this is our output feed here. What you'll see is that we've got this URL. And that URL is something we can reference as part of an external dynamic list. Let me show you that within our firewall. This is the firewall, and this is one of our demo systems. What we can do is within Objects, the Objects tab, we can create an external dynamic list. That external dynamic list references that URL I was just showing you in AutoFocus. So what we can do is we can now use this in policy. So we can take in all of these threat intelligence feeds, specify what indicators we're looking for, throw that through our aggregator, our processor, and send that out to an output so we can do an external dynamic list and really mine this information for good, valuable data, right? Okay, so that's how we add extra protections in case we find something or in case we have other threat intelligence. Finally, the last question that our CISO wanted to answer was they wanted to get an understanding of just how big of a problem this is. So let's go back here to our search, and I'm going to specifically look at a ransomware family called Cerber. The reason I'm going to look at that is because it has a tag, and most ransomware does this, where it reaches out to access digital currency. You'll see this tag here, this behavior, where they interact with a digital currency like Bitcoin, because as most people know, in order to do ransomware, we have to do a payment. That payment goes typically to Bitcoin or another digital currency. So let's see if I can look through here and find something that helps me illustrate the point to my CISO. If I look at our file analysis here, and this is taking just a moment, if I look at our file analysis, let's take a look at our HTTP requests. You'll see here that we're reaching out to a blockchain or a Bitcoin wallet address. This right here is a Bitcoin wallet. If I do a search for this, the great part about Bitcoin wallets is the wallets themselves are public and the balances in those wallets are public as well. So I've done a search for that particular Bitcoin address, and we can see that the total amount of received Bitcoin is 91 Bitcoin. And in today's dollars, that's somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000. So you can see that in one variant of one campaign, we're seeing over $200,000 for this one particular wallet. And this is one wallet out of thousands. So you can see that this is a big problem. All right, so let's jump back in. We went a little over 10 minutes. I'm about 13 minutes, but I think we'll still make it in time for our CISO's meeting. Let's jump back in and see if we can answer these questions here. All right, so are we seeing ransomware for our SaaS applications? Yes, we are. One thing I didn't point out to you is that on that second one, that invoice.doc, we didn't actually quarantine the file, we just alerted, but that's a demo system. This is what happens. We don't necessarily want to get rid of those pieces of malware. We want to be able to see those, so I can do great demos for you guys. So yes, we are seeing ransomware in our SaaS applications, and we were able to determine that within just a few minutes, or even a few seconds, excuse me. Number two, are we seeing ransomware through our organization? Yes, more than 32,000 samples from day one. If we wanted to, we could drill down into an individual week, days, hours, etc. But yes, ransomware is a massive problem hitting our environment. Is it just us or others getting hit as well? Yes, everyone's getting hit. There's more than 2 billion samples that we're seeing in Wildfire or through AutoFocus. How are we protected from ransomware? Well, we've got Wildfire signatures, threat prevention signatures, and URL filtering automatically being pushed down as we see these coming through Wildfire. Number 5, how can we add protections based on what we find? Well, through MindMeld with AutoFocus, we can create EDLs or external dynamic lists based on the third-party threat intelligence feeds, the open source intelligence feeds, that's OSINT, or AutoFocus indicators themselves. So we can create even more granular external dynamic lists and create those protections automatically. So as we're seeing these threats come in through our threat intelligence feeds, we can automatically push those down to the firewall and do those protections. So it's not even just what we see, but what's seen across the entire ecosystem. And number 6, how effective are ransomware campaigns? So this is a great analogy here, or a great example that your CISO can take in, that one variant of one version of one campaign netted more than $200,000 or netted around $200,000. So if that's one variant of one version of one campaign, you can extrapolate that out and say, okay, some are going to be less successful than this, but some are going to be more successful. This is a massive problem, and the attackers are making money. So ransomware isn't going away anytime soon. Okay, so I wanted to do this to show you that with AutoFocus, we can deep dive and get a lot of rich information and really get into the minutia. But we can also very quickly find answers to questions that would otherwise take you hours or days to really find. Question one in and of itself, in determining if you have ransomware across all your SaaS applications, any other method would be nearly impossible to do within a matter of minutes. Okay, but we were able to come up with answers to all of these in around 10 minutes. Maybe we went a little more with some explanations, but about 10 minutes we were able to come up with all of this information. So thanks for watching.